Okie dokie, and we're live. Larry, how you doing?
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing having the pre-chat and then going straight into it. There's a bit of a it's a bit odd. Introduce yourself. Tell people what you're about.
Okay, so my name's Larry Culliford, Dr. Larry Culliford. I trained as a doctor in Cambridge and at Guy's Hospital in London. And then I traveled to New Zealand and to Australia. I was in New Zealand a year, 6 years in Australia, and started training in psychiatry, became a psychiatrist, became a qualified psychiatrist on my return to the United Kingdom back in the 1980s. And worked until 2007 as a consultant psychiatrist in Brighton. And I live in West Sussex. And I should like to say that very early on, I got fascinated by the question, what is mental health? Because at medical school, we were taught about physical health, a healthy body, anatomy and physiology, and then about sickness, about pathology, and then about treatment. But it was different in psychiatry. We got pitched straight into psychopathology, mental illness, schizophrenia, depression, and so on, addictions, and so on. And I don't think anybody really tried to teach us what is mental health. So I was pondering about this back in the 70s and started to write for my own benefit to clarify my thoughts. And fairly early on decided that I needed to think in terms of 5 dimensions of health. So the physical 5 dimensions of human understanding, that's to say, human experience and understanding. So physical dimension, energy and matter, physics and chemistry, and then biology, organisms, life, psychology, the mental processes, thinking, feeling, impulses, and so on. Sociology, the social dimension, relationships and communities, and the spiritual dimension. And this is where I kind of stepped aside from the tradition that I was being taught in, very sort of science, evidence-based practice. So I started on, as I say, a long time ago, investigating the spiritual dimension. I had a background in, Christian upbringing, but by that stage I wasn't active in my religious practice. Anyway, but I was very open-minded, and the opportunity arose for me to spend time with Tibetan Buddhist monks in Australia, in Melbourne. And they taught me several things. They taught me about, they taught me how to meditate, which is basically to sit still and silent and focus your mind. And I've been doing that pretty much ever since. And they taught me about Tibetan Buddhist psychology, which is a spiritual psychology, specifically about something called Tibetan thought transformation, which allows you in meditation to observe your thoughts and feelings and the impulses that arise and watch them as they then diminish in strength and go away and maybe change into other things. So that it not only is a pathway to self-development, it's quite like cognitive behavioral, mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy. Yeah. It's a bit like that, but it's aimed towards self-development, self-improvement, not symptom reduction. So, do you get that?
Yeah.
Just pitch in and ask if I don't make any sense or haven't followed me, because but anyway, so this was really quite important for me in a very early time in my life and my career. I was sort of in my mid to late 20s, early 30s, and so I was following up this idea of a spiritual dimension, and the next kind of area that got me interested was the notion of what we call developmental psychology. So developmental psychology just means that people have worked out that there are generally stages of life that people go through or different aspects of living that you kind of have to, everybody kind of contends with and goes through, although and the path is towards what I call wisdom, or you could say spiritual maturity. So a path to wisdom or spiritual maturity. And I don't know how much detail you'd like me to go into about this, but I guess gave a webinar talk the other day to a psychology conference, and I could talk for a long time about that.
Larry, to be honest, I'd love you to talk for hours. Honestly, I've got all the time in the world for this. Like I said, at the start, it may be an hour. We could go 2 or 3 hours if you want. I'm as you know, I'm currently a student of psychology. So you being in it for years, you're sort of you're sort of opening the door a little faster than what they do at uni. Uni's a bit like I'm doing my undergrad, so it's a little bit restrictive, and it's obviously very basic. So you doing it for years gives me a lot more insight to the application of psychology in the real world, and then what you've taken from it and adapted to certain other things like spirituality and stuff. So if you wanna go, this is definitely going to be a one that I'm going to have to watch back a few times to absorb everything you say.
Okay.
And if I drift off a little bit, it's just my brain trying to process all the information. I guess just in terms of let's create a bit of a timeline, a bit of a storyline. Like when did you start your degree, and why did you start your degree as well? Like what got you into psychology to start off with?
Which degree? My medical degree, my psychiatry training.
What one did you start with?
Well, let's say I was as a schoolboy, age about 16.
Yep.
I knew I was going to become a doctor. It was a vocation, if you like. I had a kind of intuition that was the path I was supposed to travel. I was good at biology. I loved it, and it seemed a natural progression to go from into the studying biology to A levels degree level and so on. And then luckily my love of biology, fascination with genetics and evolutionary theory and so on, it slightly outstripped my love of physics and chemistry, which are the other subjects I was studying. But anyway, I got a place at Cambridge to read medicine. So that was terrific. Yeah. Now, the path to psychiatry was also, I would say, providential. So I'd done my degree, and I was doing my first year in what we call house jobs in London, which you have to do before you get full qualification. And I was in the middle of the second one of those, thinking, well, what am I going to do next? I wasn't really clear in my mind what to do. And I thought, well, I'll travel. I'd done quite a bit of traveling as a student, and thought, well, I'll travel. And so I applied for various jobs, and I got appointed to a post in the North Island of New Zealand, a surgical post. And after a few weeks there, I was a little bit unhappy. Clashes with my boss and personality clashes and things like that. Yeah. So it happened that a friend of mine was down in South Island in Christchurch, and we spoke on the phone, and he said, I'll see if there's work available for you here. I had a 1-year visa only. So to cut a long story short, there was work, but there was no choice about it. It was in psychiatry. It was a psychiatry training post in Christchurch. And I went down and did that. I spent 6 months doing that. And it was an eye-opener for me. It was also quite stressful. I mean, it opened up stuff about my own family background and stuff like that. I mean, there I was, other side of the world, as far away as I could get from my dysfunctional family, and having to actually face the issues, But that was good. It worked very well for me. Anyway, then at the end of that year, the 6 months of training in psychiatry, I still wasn't sure what to do, but I had an Australian resident permit, which I'd managed to obtain. And I went over to actually first I went to Tasmania and worked as a single-handed GP, as a locum GP for a couple of months in Tassie. And then I flew up to Sydney, where I knew some people. And I worked all over Sydney in general practice, taking on people's practices for anything up from a week up to a couple of months. and ended up in one practice in Newtown where the patients were all Greek, and they only most of them spoke only Greek.
Yeah.
And when they worked out that I didn't speak Greek, they stopped coming. You see,
Oh, really?
I was sitting in this this office, this medical office in Newtown, day after day for 8 hours with maybe 4 or 5 people a day
Nobody coming
attending.
in.
So
Yeah.
I started writing writing stuff. I wrote notes for myself, and I started writing what became a book in the end, trying to answer this question: what is mental health?
Yeah.
And thinking about the spirituality stuff like that. So and then at the end of a year in Sydney, I felt I had to make a decision. Am I going to stay in Australia, go back to England, and am I going to head for general practice properly, or am I going to go back into psychiatry? And again, to cut a long story short, I ended up in Adelaide training in psychiatry there, and did 3.5 years there before coming back to complete my education in the UK, take the British qualifying exams, and so on.
You've been around.
Oh yes, I've had an interesting life. I hope I get the chance to write, some kind of a autobiography or something someday.
You think you're very close to it. You definitely got the experience under your belt. So, what made you want to travel? Was it just the lack of position that you had when you were in the UK and you were looking for something more, or was it something like?
Yeah.
So it was just like self fulfillment, where you were like, I need a little bit more out of life.
Well, it was opportunity, really. We had family holidays overseas from.
Hold on, I think we lost you, Larry. Oh no.
So traveling, and then when I was
Larry, just one sec. Sorry to cut you off, buddy. It's getting a bit choppy here. I'm not too sure. Let me see if we're losing any bandwidth here for some reason. Sorry, continue. Yeah, we're just you're just dropping out just a little bit there at the start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Let's see how it goes. We'll see if we can continue on.
Clearly.
All right, Larry, there might be we might have to. There's a second way around this. We might have to jump on to something else to try and clear it up. I think it just might be a bandwidth issue. We're running a little slow. Give me 1 sec. 1 second, buddy. Yikes. Larry, can you still hear me? I think I think everything's just dropped. I think we've lost Larry. I can still see you, Larry.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can sort of hear you. Sorry, it must be an internet issue. I've never had this happen, so I'm not sure how to deal with it or fix it.
Okay. It may be just a local one here. We get just once in a while we get a problem.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
taking guitar lessons, and my guitar lesson cut off the other day.
Oh, really? You're trying to do guitar lessons over Zoom? That'd be something. Technology
is working. I've been doing it for a year now on Zoom. It's fine.
Hey, how you going with it? Sorry, I know you were telling a bit of a story there, but
that's okay. People might be interested. I'm about the age of 65. I started to learn classical guitar.
Yeah, right. What made you get into it? Where was the decision where you're just sitting there one day and you're like, guitar is the way to go?
My wife Sarah started it first. There's a local teacher, and they were offering like taster sessions, and my wife had studied the violin when she was young, and then stopped, and she didn't like the violin as much, and so she thought, well, I'll try the guitar. So she was doing lessons for about 6 months, and I thought, well, that doesn't look so difficult as I thought. And she had, the teacher, I have to tell you, is an absolute darling. She's an angel, and really good. So I thought, well, Oh yeah, and then I was walking down the high street, and in one of the charity shops there was a guitar for sale for £20. You see,
Perfect.
so I went and bought that, and then I had the taster sessions, and I've just gone from there.
It gets its hooks into you fairly deeply. The playing a musical instrument, it does. It's I think my first guitar wasn't worth much more. I think mine was like one from a garage sale. My parents bought it for me, and they're like, "This is
well."
Prove yourself, and then we'll buy you something
mine's
better.
Pretty good. And by the time I'd had it refurbished and new strings, it's okay. It's really good.
Yeah,
so I'm about 5 years in now. I'm doing some grade 4 type stuff. But I've told my teacher I'm not taking any exams. I do not want to take another.
Exams are over for the rest of your life. I do. So
which I can just.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was just saying I can learn to play some nice tunes and don't have to worry about the curriculum, etc.
How are the calluses on the fingers?
Yeah, I got them, but it's okay. Not that I haven't got. I don't. I play maybe 30 minutes a day or something, so it's not terrible.
Yeah, that's good. Adi, back to your story. Sorry, that was. I think it seems to be.
So I forget what I was telling you about, something about my father, but I can't remember what the question was.
Let's just start from the start.
Oh yeah, traveling.
Yeah,
I started traveling. Okay, so we had these long summer vacations at Cambridge, and my parents had separated, and my father had remarried, and it wasn't a good place to be home all that long summer. So I'd had the summer before, after I left school, at home, and I thought, well, I can just travel, and I had a couple of friends who had this idea that they would travel overland, hitchhike to somewhere like Istanbul.
Yeah, right.
So I'd never hitchhiked a mile before, but I said I'll come with you.
How was that?
And that was a 2-month exciting time where we took the ferry across to Holland, hitched through Holland and Germany and Switzerland, down through Italy. Took the boat across to Corfu from Brindisi, and then made our way through Greece and down to the island of Rhodes, and from the island of Rhodes up into Turkey and all around Turkey, back through Istanbul, and all up through the former Yugoslavia and home. It was an extraordinary, wonderful adventure. And of course, I hadn't got a clue what I was doing, but a lot of times, very good things happened. I kind of began to have faith in the benevolence of the universe, if you like, or
doing something like that, you kind of have to throw it out and hope for the best, right? You have to pray to the universe, and you're like, be gentle. That's a wild experience.
Gained a lot of confidence. I was not a very confident person before that, but it gave me a huge amount of confidence.
Yep.
And then in the following year, I had the opportunity to spend 3 months in the United States and Canada. And the year after that, with a different traveling companion, I went similarly through Europe and Italy and Greece, and then to Rhodes, and then to the Lebanon and Syria, places that, have all been. I mean, I went to Palmyra, the city in the desert, for instance, and the Crac de Chevalier, the big Crusader castle in Syria, and so on. Places that Homs and Hama, you couldn't, they've just been so beaten up now in the Syrian war, etc. So back through Turkey and again up through former Yugoslavia and so on. I just think I was just so lucky to have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, definitely. How old were you?
71.
Like when you did all that traveling?
Last week I was 71.
Oh, you've turned 71. No, how old were you when you decided to backpack and travel that much?
Oh, I see. How old was I? Okay, fine. I was 19 the first time, 20 when I went to America, 1970, the year after the Woodstock Festival.
Yep.
Hippies, we were all hippie. I had long hair, beads, tie-dyed jeans and all that. And then the following year, 71, I went to Beirut, to Lebanon, and all that.
You really got to write a book about this, the life of Larry. They'll make it into a movie. It'll be 4 hours long.
Well, it's quite difficult to get it right, pitch it right with the spiritual, because it feels like I've been on a spiritual journey as well as a a kind of a journey of adventure and excitement. So it'd be quite difficult to write it and get it right. But yeah, I might do that.
I think you should
one day.
Did this all contribute to where you are now? Like, obviously, going through the degrees and the courses and the studying that you went through, it is very literal. It is very to the fact. Do you think this travel really opened your eyes to the spiritual side of things and the fact that there is stuff that humans can't explain and there's a little bit more? Do you think that all helped?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I have to say, I was a lazy student, particularly in my 3 years at Cambridge. I think I nearly flunked the first year exams. I'm not quite sure how I managed to get through them at all. I do have a slight excuse in that I was knocked off my bicycle in the first week of my first term at Cambridge, and I think I had a post-concussion syndrome, which was never diagnosed. So I didn't want to get out of bed in the mornings, and I got to lectures and fell asleep again, But anyway, so I was always, I feel somehow absorbing what I needed to know. And the fact that I wasn't a great student actually was one of the things that probably steered me towards psychiatry, because it wasn't a popular subject. You could get into, get good jobs because there was not a huge amount of competition.
Yeah.
And then when I was doing it, I just took to it. I felt this like empathic link with people.
Yeah.
With patients, colleagues, and everything. And you had to learn to manage that. If you have empathy is a word that's used a lot and sometimes gets mixed up with what I would call sympathy. So there's a distinction between the two. Empathy for me is where you literally are feeling what the other person is feeling. You can feel their feelings at the same moment if you're in the same room or even on a screen.
Yeah.
So and then they can feel yours. So this is very good in psychology, psychotherapy, and psychiatry, because you get information about people and you can give it back to them. You can say, oh, you seem angry today, or you seem quite sad when you tell me about that. And they hadn't completely got that or given names to their feelings. That's helpful. And then they trust you more, they tell you more, you open up. It improves the doctor-patient relationship, or what you call it. And also you're transmitting to them feelings like confidence, hope, courage, inner strength, calm, equanimity, resilience. If you've developed those in yourself, and I see becoming a health professional or many types of work, but particularly psychological work, as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to help yourself grow. And I don't think that's widely canvassed as one of the attractions of the job, because given that if you like, from one perspective, our lives are about growing and becoming the best kind of people we can, adopting values like honesty and humility and generosity and kindness, patience, perseverance. Well, how do you develop those characteristics if you don't do it through suffering or through adversity? And not only your own suffering, but through sharing the sufferings of others. So mental health, the kind of suffering that people experience during mental health issues is pretty extreme. And if you can engage with that suffering mindfully, if you like, then it benefits both parties. That's how I've always experienced it. So I've always felt great respect and gratitude for people who've come to me for help. And I don't think that's necessarily a common attitude or experience. It's not how people are taught these days, or even we were taught more about symptom control, diagnostic make a diagnosis, apply treatment, and try and get results, this sort of results orientated thing, whatever that might mean, reduce bed occupancy and so on and so on. So it's a different approach to a profession, and one I've always taken, that I'm getting a lot more out of it, or at least I'm getting as much out of it as ever I can put into it.
Yeah, so a bit of give and take. Do you have you seen it change over the last, whatever years since you were working in it, and now currently, like, where you stand? Do you think the whole psychology of humanity is changing a little bit, or do you think it's still fairly rigid?
It's difficult, to say. I retired from clinical practice and the National Health Service in 2007, and I retired because the organization had become overly committed to political and financial aims and goals, and had forgotten about caregiving, and had forgotten about taking care of its professional staff, much less its patients. There were some particular issues of which I was trying to counter where I was working. The closure of a particular unit, which, as far as I was concerned, was exceptionally successful.
Yeah.
But it didn't meet the political aims and ambitions of the organization. And at the same time, it happened that my mother was very sick. She'd just been widowed, and she needed some help. She lived very nearby. And I also wanted to write some more. So I left the service then. So is it changing, or has it changed? Well, it was true then, and it, I'm sure, is at least continues to be the case, if not worse, that it becomes almost a sort of, I hate to use a jargon phrase, tick box exercises in making diagnoses and applying treatment, lacks the humanity that officially. I think the people who work in the profession of psychiatry are compassionate in the main. They are wonderful people, and they are working in very difficult circumstances. But if you read the psychiatric journals, which I still receive, they are very dry and almost, I would say they except in rare cases, you get the feeling that people are doing research and writing papers, presumably to benefit their academic careers and maybe their professional careers. As indeed, when I was at a trainee level, we were obliged to undertake research of some kind and get published. Even though I could never think of a way that doing that actually helped anybody, except in terms of professional career promotion. So I actually never did, after 4 years of spending a day a week on psychiatry research, I never published a word, because I couldn't just commit to a project I thought would be actually useful, beneficial.
So is that what it is?
My professor obviously thought I was, hopeless. But subsequently, I've written more words than anyone else I can think of. I've written, 5 or 6 books and 4 or 5 papers on spirituality and psychiatry, on wisdom. I just published a paper very recently called Philosophy and Psychology Engaged.
Yeah,
and that's leading to a book I've just finished writing called The Marriage of Philosophy and Psychology, and it's partly about how young people, well, you'd come into this category, seek to train in psychology and philosophy because they want to find out about themselves and other people and how to live a good life, a useful life, make a contribution. But that's not actually necessarily what they get taught.
No, not even close.
I don't know what your experience is about like that, whether you went into psychology thinking and hoping for one thing and did that match up with what you actually got?
So I think I was a little backwards into it. I was a personal trainer before this, so dealing with people a lot every day. And I think if you start to if you take somebody who isn't 100% comfortable with themselves, especially with the way they look, they tend to, when you touch on that and you start to change it, they open up more. They start to tell you about their life. You become like it's sort of that hairdresser sense where people start to discuss like their life with you, and then it gets personal, gets incredibly personal. And once again, just exactly what you said before, you become incredibly empathetic. I think some people have it and some don't. And I started steering more towards that side of it. So when you get into when I got into psychology, you do go on the basis that you are going to help people. Like people are the key. And this is why you're getting into it. Exactly as you said, as soon as you start to study, it changes. It is quite tick the box, get them in, get them out. This is their problem. This is how you fix it. Scoot them on their way type thing. I think it's even like I said, me just doing my undergrad, it is very apparent already that that is the way they want to steer it. And that's the direction it'll be heading into the future, where it's you can't get into psychology and not care about the people you deal with. But I think they want to breed the future psychologist and yada yada, as similar to GPs, where you go see a GP, you're in there for 8 minutes, and then they boot you out with some tablets in your hand. I think it's a Band-Aid solution for people who can't have a Band-Aid solution to fix their life. Especially with today's problems, the increasing use of social media, this expectation of how your life is and how your life should be. It's very it's increasing the amount of people who need help with their mental health. They need to learn steps to improve it and to make it better. And you're getting sent out there as a psychologist, ill-equipped. They're kind of undercutting it all. I tell people that I study psychology, and it's a bit of an arse degree. You know what I mean? They don't take it as serious. It's not, you're not an engineer, you're not yada yada. So it's even like looked at like that, where it's like, oh, you're just going to talk to people all day, and you're like, that's it. Whatever you think is going to happen, that's what it is. So,
well, the webinar I just did the other day, the title of my talk was something like "Back from the Brink of Disaster: Philosophy and Psychology to the Rescue."
Yeah.
So it's about expanding the remit, if you like, of what is psychology about, and philosophy, if you like. Or I can say more about psychology perhaps now, because if you look at the world that, young people are having to grow up in and deal with, it's different from when I was young, a teenager, a young adult. So we have currently a COVID-19 pandemic, but we also have global warming, eco-destruction, and we also have a thermonuclear threat that is growing, undoubtedly. In this country, just last week, the government have decided to increase our nuclear arsenal.
That's what we need more of.
At great expense.
Yeah, let's not house the homeless.
Apparently we might get targeted by a nuclear threat from terrorists in the future. Well, so what good, I wonder, will having nuclear weapons do if terrorists have got them? Because terrorists are not a suitable target for nuclear weapons. Anyway, that's beside the point. It's a bit of my my peacemaker hobby horse there, but so there's all kinds of other things. I use a quote from Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land, his fairly recent book. So he talks about a world of global supply chains, instantaneous capital transfers, social media, transnational terrorist networks, climate change, mass migration, and ever increasing complexity. So he says, we will learn to live together, cooperate with one another, and recognize the dignity of others, or we will perish. psychology has the job of teaching people how to learn to live together and cooperate with one another and recognize the dignity of others. It's a huge responsibility and task, but that in my view, you can take cases one by one of people with psychological problems, but if you don't also take into account the bigger picture, then you're going to miss an opportunity, to put it mildly. And so I also say that those problems that we've talked about, COVID-19 and climate change and warfare and refugees and all that kind of thing, but psychologists and psychiatrists and psychotherapists are dealing with another kind of epidemic, an epidemic of anxiety, an epidemic of depression, and an epidemic in particular of addiction disorders, not only to nicotine, alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, recreational drugs, hard drugs, and gambling and so on, but also work addiction, food addiction, sex addiction, shopping addiction, social media addiction. There are all kinds of addictions. And if one comes to understand addictions from a spiritual perspective, they are all attempts to fill a void.
That's right.
And the only thing that works to fill that void is some kind of spiritual awareness or connection. And that's why the 12-step method is successful in some cases. It's probably why mindfulness-based programs are helpful. And I think, academic psychology, if you like, would do well to take on board the bigger picture and introduce a spiritual dimension to the paradigm which already includes a physical dimension, a biological dimension, a psychological dimension, and a social dimension. So one of the early papers I wrote for a psychiatric journal was about two papers, one about spirituality and psychiatry, general introduction, and the second one about taking a spiritual history. In other words, finding out what the spiritual aspects of people's lives, where they're working to help them, which they very often are, and where they are working, against them because they have an emptiness or a lack of a spiritual dimension in their lives. Spirituality gives a life meaning and purpose. It's about meaning and purpose, belonging to, having a sense of connection with something greater, a greater whole. It's about unity, sacred unity, if you like. I know people switch. I mean, if they switch off at the word, when they hear you're a psychologist, let me tell you, people switch off at the word spirituality too.
Definitely.
They think it's sort of, there's no evidence. It's not evidence-based stuff. Well, there is evidence, but you have to go after it as an individual. You have to set yourself the task of exploring the spiritual dimension, which I liken to a game park, an adventure park, rather than spirituality isn't like a thing that you fix and examine and dissect. It's more like a play area. You can go in and explore and discover. So that's how I sometimes try and kind of make it appealing to people, because it's actually an adventure park we're already in. You can't, you might as well go looking around and finding out about it.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
There are ways to do that. So I also advocate something called a wisdom practice routine. That's what I've come to call it. I used to call it a spiritual development program or a personal growth plan, but it's a wisdom practices or spiritual exercises engaged in on a regular basis is how to explore your own spiritual dimension and that of other people. I could say a bit more about that if you'd like. I mean,
just a touch on it before you do. Like, I definitely agree. And I think with what you're saying, do you think they're going to adopt it, or do you think it's something that someone like you has to really push forward, and hopefully the next generation grabs it and continues to push it forward. Because I don't ever see universities around the world adopting this ever. Like adopting the spiritual side into to just A to B psychology. I don't think they ever will. I think it'll have to be done like external. Because as you said before, like academia is incredibly rigid. Everybody's out to prove a point. They've got papers to do so they can get tenure, and tenure provides them a life because then they make money and whatever off it. They're too focused on that aspect of it, falling into the societal norm of having a bigger house, having a bigger car, and I need to do that by publishing this paper, and it won't get published if I try and bring something like spirituality into it. Because once again, it isn't tangible. It's not, you can't grab it with your hands, you can't break it down, you can't dissect it. So do you think it's just going to have to be something that lives on the fringe of psychology but also on the fringe of spirituality? Because I've recently had a few people on. I had Andrew D on, and I had Sarah Maloney. Andrew D's a psychic, and Sarah Maloney's a yoga instructor who's deep into the spirituality side. And I guess there's that little fringe in the middle where me and them can sort of talk and riff it out. But on the far edges, it's like a left and right argument. They both don't talk to each other. They don't want to talk to each other because their side is right and the other side is wrong. So do you think it's always going to be like that, or do you think it'll be adopted in the future?
Well, I tend to agree that it's more like that I have no time. I take the long view. I don't think that. I mean, I've been writing about this stuff for quite a long time and thinking about it for much longer. And I think your assessment is probably correct, as we are now, that for the foreseeable future, academic departments are not going to change. But change. Complete change, paradigm shifts do sometimes happen. When Einstein published his theories, people had to think very differently about physics. And so, it's not impossible. And I would be hopeful that whatever the way forward, whether it be mainstream or not, it'll certainly not be to start with. Actually, there are university departments of things like transpersonal psychology, which, one or two. I'm aware of one in the UK, I think, who do talk. They don't use the term spirituality, but that's the ballpark they are in. Holistic psychology and to some extent, positive psychology is in that ballpark also. And the other thing that's positive, which I've mentioned in my latest book, and which is called The Big Book of Wisdom. What is it? Why do we need it? And how to get it? So wisdom is what's going on in schools. I mean, some schools are teaching meditation. They call it stilling in some of the schools. They teach character education. I was for a while a school governor of a school where they teach character education as a main element of the curriculum. And so there is a sense in which there's movement in a good direction. But obviously my sense is that it needs individuals to take an interest and work on their own personal development and spiritual development, getting what help and teaching they can from other people. And maybe, within university departments, obviously it's more difficult perhaps when people are not physically meeting together, or it's difficult to meet in small groups and so on, but actually forming little meditation groups and discussion groups about, so alongside meditation, contemplation or reflective practice. I think these two things go together. And there is a kind of evolutionary energy, I think. I don't think psychological evolution is I think it happens not at a rapid pace. And one needs patience and perseverance in terms of one's own personal development and also in terms of humanity's development. I think, humanity is in a very early adolescence, if you like. And whether it self-destructs before it gets a chance to reach adulthood and maturity remains to be seen. I'm being distracted by an animal. Is it an animal behind you on the couch there?
That's my partner. She's currently
I can only see them.
She's under a blanket. It's winter here, so it's very cold.
Or something.
Yeah, sorry. No. It's just she's on the lounge with the blanket on. She's watching a lecture at the moment. So
okay, so say hi. And
we'll do
everything. Okay,
hey,
so real life steps in.
Mary said hi. She said hi.
What is her name?
Mem. Marianne, but we like everyone calls her Mem. MEM.
Lovely, great.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. She's waving. Great. Sorry to embarrass you.
Yeah.
Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so we were talking about how the future is going to unfold. I really don't know, but I have this tremendous sense of optimism. I don't know. It isn't necessarily rational, but it is about this sense of I suppose I have a sense of a loving universe ultimately.
Yeah.
And I sometimes use the word God. Why not? I've been going. I resumed Christian worship some years ago, and I probably don't have a view of Christianity that I certainly have a different one from when I was young, and I don't probably have one that fits entirely accurately with church authorities. But I do have a sense of relationship with a divine something.
Yeah, same. I agree.
And a Holy Spirit, if you like, talking in terms of a personal connection through what I call spiritual self or wisdom mind or soul, with this overarching spirit or cosmic energy or cosmic intelligence or something, and that it's through that link between the individual and the whole that we are all connected, and we are all connected not only to each other, to everybody who's ever lived, to everybody who will live, but also to nature, to the planet, to life, to the universe, really. So there's this wonderful seamlessness, the sacred whole, which informs my spirituality, my being, really, and everyone's, I think. And it's exploring that. It's discovering that I think is one of psychology's central tasks.
Yeah, it definitely has to go a little bit deeper. I think that the rigid sense of it has been because it's what we know and it kind of works, and then trying to implement it across the world. I don't know a person who doesn't have mental health issues. Everybody has a little bit of something going on, whether it be anxiety or some sort of stress disorder or whatever it may be. So I think what we're doing right now just isn't covering it. So there has to be a sense of this adoption of spirituality to dig a little deeper. I also agree with you with the in the sense of God. I'm no way religious, but I do believe that there's something.
Yeah.
Once again, I like to use like the term. It's like a universal power where everything is kept in balance, perfect balance, and then we're just a part of that in like varying levels. So at individual level, at a community, and so on on a humanity level, that everything is balanced and the way it's supposed to be. What got you back into it? Was there a time when you found yourself? Obviously, you said you went to the church when you were younger. Did that somehow fall off because of the way they teach spirituality through the churches? and then as you grew older, you readopted it, but in your own sense of the word? Or was it something you sort of held on to and then just cut away the edges?
Yeah, right. So I became religious as a schoolboy. I had a wonderful teacher, scripture teacher. So the Bible made sense, how the Old Testament leads into the New Testament, how the old 10 commandments lead to the commandments of love, loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving yourself. Loving yourself is actually a good trick to learn. So I left school and I started attending my local church in the town I was living in by my parents, and it was empty. 4 or 5 people would turn up and everything would be very dull. It didn't have any life. So I just stopped going there. And then I got it, I was a medical student. I would have said from then on that medicine was my religion. It was the main focus of my whatever spiritual life I had. But I have to say that I wasn't very, I had a good life, a good fun life, but I wasn't very spiritual in those days, particularly, all that. But I might have to edit some of that out of my autobiography.
Yeah, that's right. We'll leave that part out.
So, as I say, I went overseas and I didn't feel like I was part of any religious community, although, as I said, I spent some time with Buddhists, but I didn't feel like I would join as a Buddhist, become a Buddhist. I didn't think that would happen. Anyway, after I came back to England, I didn't work for well over a year. I didn't know what I was going to do. I trained as a psychiatrist in Australia, but I hadn't qualified, and I came back to the UK, and I was sort of traveling around the country, and I spent some time in a Buddhist retreat center, and I was sitting in meditation one day, and the Lord's Prayer started whirring around in my head, and some of the hymns that I had been singing as known from childhood. And I thought, whoa, I'm looking around me at the Buddha images, etc. I thought I'm in the wrong place, Yeah. But at that time, I was so deeply into the spiritual way that I had even thought of becoming a religious, becoming a monk. But I thought, well, I can't become a Buddhist monk. And I didn't know anything about Christian monks at that stage, monasteries and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and then I had a kind of awakening moment where a voice, as it were a voice, it wasn't a voice, but it felt like a voice in my head that wasn't me, said, it said, I can remember it verbatim, it said, you are a psychiatrist, Larry. That's what you have trained to do. Go and do that. And so I was in the north of England. I went back to London, and the following day I looked in the medical journal ads for jobs, and there was a psychiatry training post advertised, and I knew it would be mine. And I went to see the professor and said, look, I've done this bit of training and I'm thinking of applying to come and finish it off with you. And he said, do apply. And so I did that. And then, so I was involved in working around in Southwest London area, and I needed at some point to buy a house or rent a house or buy a house. And I bought a house, and it was quite near a church. And it was a big old church. And I thought, oh, I'll go in there one day and have a look around, maybe go to a Sunday service. I hadn't felt particularly like resuming religion again. But I just thought, well, it's in my neighborhood. I'll meet some of my neighbors and all that. And the day I decided to go, I walked down to the church. It was only a 1-minute walk, and I was so nearby. I didn't leave home till 5 to 10 or whatever time the service started. And when I got in, the place was packed. You couldn't hardly get in.
Yeah.
And I managed to find a little space right near the back. And as soon as I sat, we all stood up again, and the choir came in procession. The organ picked up. And at the end of this procession, there was a bishop, and a bishop has a crozier, a shepherd's crook.
Yeah.
well, I'm Larry the lamb, right?
Yeah.
So I immediately thought, oh, I'm being pulled back by the shepherd into the flock. And it happened that he was there to bless the church because it had been damaged by lightning strike and it had been repaired, and he came to bless the church.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that. I just had this great sense that, and it was really, struck deep in my heart. I was back. But actually, I left that place quite soon after. I didn't continue worshiping there. I came to live in the town I now live in. So this was in the late 80s. And there's a beautiful church here. It's built in the 12th century. And I started to go there to services once in a while, just maybe once a month or whatever. And after a year or two, somebody, said, well, you're the sort of person we could do with on the church council.
Yeah, right.
And just little by little, I got drawn into going, and now it's very much part of my life and my wife's life. I mean, we do services on the moment, but we're going back for Sunday service next Sunday for the first time, Palm Sunday.
Yeah, that's I think it'd be hard for you, right? Like I said, it's it being something like so structured and regimented, like the psychology side of things, and then having that openness and that type of free will of exploring your options in terms of like choosing a religious thing, but then that I think it's sort of I had a chat with my friends about it the other day, the free will versus the set path. But it seems to be like you're always sort of like destined to go into these things, right? Like you're in a sense destined to do both of them.
Yeah.
Do you believe it's a path type thing, or do you think it's a free will? Do you think you were given the options and you decided, or do you think this is Larry from day one?
That's a very good question. I feel liberated, feel free, and I also feel obedient to something I don't understand.
Yep.
And it may be a path, but it's not a path that I can see, ahead of me. Many of the turns in the path, or the things that have come about, have been surprises. There have been many, what you might call synchronicities, many meaningful coincidences that have helped me think, oh, this is correct. I'm in the right place. I'm doing the right thing. So I don't like the idea of belief. The word I kind of beliefs, I think, are ego structures in a way. They are kind of attachments that people get into difficulties about. I wouldn't say I believe anything. I'm just open to how things are, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so, and there are some things I know through experience that I can't necessarily get. I can't say I have any proof about this. I just say, but why don't you look into it for yourself? This is what also the Buddhist taught. Don't take what I say, what the Buddha says, explore it, experiment, expand your own experience and understanding, and use what we say maybe as a guide to that. But don't be, if it doesn't work for you, that's fine.
I think that's the scary part about spirituality, right? It's if we're going to use the term path, it's a path not set out for anybody else but yourself. And humans are very tribal. They like being around things that make them feel safe. And then there's always that old proverb of the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So taking that path is a path that you can only do by yourself. Do you think that's why people struggle with spirituality so much?
I don't know. You remind me that one of the Buddhist teachers I encountered along the way said, it is scary. It's like jumping out of an airplane and realizing you haven't got a parachute.
Yeah.
But then you look down and you realize there's no earth.
Oh.
It's just free fall.
That is good.
Yeah, it's just free fall. And the other Buddhist kind of story that I like is this, that okay, so the world is full of there's the terrain is rocky and sharp rocks under your feet. So you don't have to carpet the whole world. You only have to fashion a strong and comfortable pair of slippers for yourself. You have to do your own stuff. You can't do everybody's. You can't do anybody else's spirituality for them. So
like
you have to have a kind of faith that as you develop your own spiritual awareness and shift forwards on this stages of development that I refer to in my books and articles and things, and my blog, which I write for Psychology Today, the website of Psychology Today, that as you go forward in these in this on this sort of pathway, if you like, you have to have confidence that that what you're doing is of benefit to others. That the less you are enthralled to secular, worldly, materialist, commercial values, power over people, possessions, wealth, status, fame, and stuff like that. The kind of stuff that kind of our culture really does promote actively and also subliminally. But as you are able to let go of those priorities and adopt the more what I call spiritual values of wisdom and kindness and compassion and generosity, honesty, humility, frugality. So frugality, where you get what you need, but you don't get stuff you don't over stock on stuff that you don't need or is not of genuine sort of authentic value. So the more you adopt these different values, the more the more you're actually benefiting people around you and people in your community, and indeed people at large, people throughout the world.
Yeah. Do you think
and
sorry, you go.
Sorry, I was just going to add to, because you were talking about the scariness. I don't feel any fear.
I think it's just stepping off the ledge,
I don't feel any
right?
fear.
I think it's that initial step that is a scary part. Like going beyond that initial step, that's when you start to your path starts to unlock a little more. It's just opening the door to get on that path that is the scary part. Is that correct?
Well, you've got to be lucky, I guess, or blessed, and find others who will do it with you. Find a community that can just be one other person, spiritual friends, you could say. Some of the Buddhists call it the Sangha, the community of spiritually minded people. But you just need to find some support there. Maybe a teacher, if you can find a teacher, meditation teachers, a guru, if you like, a mentor. But there's plenty of instruction. I mean, there's plenty of books, and there's all the wisdom literature in the world, and poetry, and scripture. Bibles and Qurans and the sayings of the Buddha and the Tao Te Ching and all of that. I mean, I've a library here. There's countless spiritual books, wisdom books, wisdom literature, and I've written a few. So there is plenty of instruction, and after a bit, you realize, well, you're not alone. You might feel like you're alone, but you're not. You might feel like you stand out. You're on the margins, but actually, you're not. You're a part of a timeless mainstream. Goes back to the dawn of humanity and the people who first, by oral tradition, the Hindu Upanishads, which are very ancient, and then were eventually written down, and the Bhagavad Gita, and so on and so on. The tradition is long, and they all these, the Sufi tradition, they all map onto each other, these spiritual traditions. And what I've tried to do is write a kind of more secular version.
Yeah.
But whatever I write and trying to use, language that people don't necessarily find off-putting. I try to avoid using the word God in my books, for instance. Even though I wrote a book which was called Much Ado About Something, we were talking about that something. For a Christian publisher, I still find it, the word God has so much baggage.
Yeah, that's correct. I think it's been damaged.
It's
by
quite a good one to avoid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's where I think there's a lot of hesitance towards it as well. The as soon as you mention God or spirituality, it's immediately attached to religion. Religion, as good as it may be for some, it is incredibly horrible for others. So I think as soon as you start to mention all of this, like you said, if you can avoid those key words that people are just going to lock onto, but there's not going to be a change in it. And I think there's an aspect of, even in the religious world, where there's people who are in it for the good and who want to spread this spirituality, and then there's people out there who are just going to abuse it. But just same with the spiritual world in itself. As I was saying to you before, even me talking to some of them, some of them they've used spirituality to heal themselves from whatever it may be, some childhood trauma, so anything, name the name. And as soon as I say I'm studying psychology, like the walls come up. You don't know anything. You're an idiot. You're been indoctrinated. Like there's that hesitation for it to mix. And there's a big sense of ego attached to it that limits people from like pushing forward with learning. With your books, is it purely based on your learnings, and do you word it in a sense that this is my path, this is what I did to reach where I am, or is it just a collective stories from around the world where you've heard things and you've applied them?
Oh, they're very definitely ideas I have been developing, working on for a long time.
Yeah.
But they are developments in some cases of ideas put forward first by other people.
Yeah.
So have you heard of James Fowler?
I've heard of James
Fowler, 1981 book, 6 Stages of Faith.
Yeah.
So I've developed Fowler's stages, and I've written much more than he ever did about the later stages, 5 and 6. And I've written much more than he ever did about transition, how you go from one stage into the next stage.
Yeah.
How people evolve. And something I'm quite pleased with, something I developed in the 80s and early 90s, which I don't think I've seen anywhere else, is a scheme about psychological healing, emotional healing, how our emotions heal, and with the healing automatically comes growth.
Yep.
And I could just say a little bit about that, because I think it was a very valuable insight for me to develop. I tried to get it published. I wrote it in a whole number of different ways, sent it to psychology journals, psychiatry journals. They all said, where is your evidence? We're not going to publish this. Where is your evidence? I said, no, it's a theory. You publish a theory and then people start looking for the evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, it was no. So that's partly why I wrote one of my early books. I wrote a book called Happiness, I wrote it under, I used a pen name in those days, Patrick Whiteside. And in that, it was the first time I propounded this idea. And I have to go through it quite simply and quickly. But the idea is that there are, and I guess there's a Buddhist influence in this. The idea is that emotional pain is based on reaction to threat and loss.
Yeah.
Threat of loss. So it's all down to loss. Well, you're not vulnerable to loss until you're attached, until you're emotionally invested in something.
Yeah.
And equally, aversion, that is to say, is a negative attachment. So every time you're attached to something, you're averse to losing it.
Yeah.
Every time you hate something, you're attached to the idea of not being around it. So they kind of go together. So then, okay, so you attach to something, and it can be a thing, an object, a precious object. It can be a person, a place, an activity. It can be an idea, an ideology, a belief, a religious belief, a belief system. It can be something you've created in your own imagination. You can be averse to the idea that a bomb is going to drop on my house today, even though, obviously it's not very likely. You've made that up, I think. So you start off with the attachment, and then what happens? Well, immediately you set up the circumstances for anxiety, the threat of loss, and bewilderment, and doubt. Those three kind of negative or painful emotions arise. Now, for each painful emotion, I'm saying there's a pain-free or opposite or complement.
Yep.
So bewilderment, the opposite is clarity, clear-mindedness. Anxiety, calm. Doubt, certainty. And then when the loss becomes more threatening and actually starts happening, anger is one of the reactions to that. So that's another and powerful response. Somebody's taking something from you, or somebody's attacking your ideas. You believe in this, and they're arguing against you. And then when the loss starts to become real and you can't prevent it, or you get the feeling that whatever it is slipping away from you, then you start to feel shame and maybe guilt. You feel responsible.
Yep.
And then finally, when the loss is happening and you can't prevent it, you feel sadness. So the alternatives to anger is acceptance or acquiescence. The shame, the opposite of shame, or is a feeling of worth and self-worth. The opposite of guilt is innocence or purity, and the opposite of sadness is joy or happiness. So there's this eightfold spectrum, if you like, of I call them cognitive emotional pairs. Now, when you lose something, or when you let go of the attachment to something, which is even more important, or equally the aversion to something, in other words, when you become friends with your enemy, or when you forgive, then the process, it's like a spectrum. They're all interrelated. So you go right through the spectrum of feelings. You may not feel them all, or you may feel them all confused and jumbled together, or you may feel them all repeating each other, in a kind of repetitive spiral. Depends on intensity and so on. But ultimately, the point is you go through bewilderment, anxiety, doubt, anger, shame, and guilt, and end up, as you let go finally, as you release through catharsis, through tears and crying, or rage, or whatever it is, they simmer down. The energy goes out of the system, and you come down back to kind of contentment. You've given up on wanting, on desire, and you've got contentment, satisfaction, and clarity of mind, and calmness, and certainty, and acceptance, and a sense of worth and value, and being valued, of innocence, and of joy. Now, that's where psychology needs to go, isn't it? That's part of what positive psychology is about. But I don't remember reading anywhere else that that's the outcome of a successful grieving process, emotional healing process, that you let go of the attachment and you become whole again, and your energies simmer down. And you can help this. You can foster this process of healing through meditation practice, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're calming down the energy levels of your, presumably, amygdala or whatever part of the brain it's working in, and you adopt particularly calm, and you find your way to contentment and acceptance, and those others. So there's a process, and it leaves you not just whole and healed, but more mature, a little bit wiser, better able to live in the moment, because you're less anxious about what may happen. You're less fearful. You're less full of regret about what has happened. You're more focused on the here and now, and you're more resilient. You're more courageous. You're more spontaneous. You can you feel free, much more free, and so on. So actually, this is all about growing through suffering, and not trying to spend your life to avoiding suffering. It's a complete shift of emphasis.
Yeah, but nobody wants to feel bad. That's a problem, and I think what they don't realize is the avoidance of feeling bad just extends feeling bad. If you really put it off,
I say it like this. The problem is not feeling bad. The problem is feeling bad about feeling bad.
That's right. That's spot on though. And but I think we've all seen it though, and it's very hard. I think it's at that time it is impossible to go take a step back and sit in it and really not appreciate it, but just bask in it a little bit and feel those different feelings, all those things that you've listed off. Feel them, absorb them.
Yeah.
Break them down. But it's once again, I think it's something that needs to be adopted very early before like pre-event, what it may be, a breakup, a loss of a family member, name it whatever it is. It's something that needs to be taught much earlier on, because I think it's one of those things, if you try and tell somebody to sit in the pain of something as they're going through it, they're just going to tell you to bugger off.
Well, I like to say sometimes the pain is the medicine. The pain is the medicine. And it's going to get better, but maybe it'll get worse, or it'll feel worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
And if you can, as it were, like hold somebody's hand through that process, then it's doable. But you have to share it with them. I'd just say a little bit about compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion, okay, it's from a Latin word, 2 words, with, feeling. You're feeling with, you're actually suffering with. So it's about sharing a person's suffering. So when I was a trainee psychiatrist, we had one ward full of, I was sent to work on this ward where it was full of people who were basically no-hopers. They were, and one particular man was miserable from morning to night. He would cry, weep, and he would say very few incoherent words except, help me, oh God, help me, or please help me. And he was very well known. All the treatments had been tried. Nothing had worked on him. And he'd been there like that for a long time. And I felt awful. Didn't know what to do to help him. And I happened to be talking to a Tibetan Buddhist monk around that time, having meetings with him. And I started to tell him about this. And he said, where is the suffering, Larry? And I said, well, it's in that ward. It's full of all these people who are suffering. He said, no, Larry, where is the suffering? And eventually I realized, I said, it's here, pointing to my heart. I said, the suffering is here. He says, yes. And then he said, and why are you suffering? And I thought about it. I said, well, because I care. He said, yes. He says, that's compassion. It hurts, and it hurts because you care. And it completely changed my attitude to that. It made me realize that compassion was part of who I am. And it wasn't something I could, ignore, or it was something I could use.
Yeah.
It was something I could use to tell me about, what I could cope with and what I couldn't cope with, and what my own boundaries were with regard to the kind of work I was doing. And astonishingly, this fellow, when I went to see him again soon after, he seemed to recognize something had changed, because I was standing there. We were actually out in the open on this particular occasion with great fencing around, because it was a locked unit. He had never spoken anything coherent except, as I say, God help me, etc. And anyway, he could see I was puzzled, and I was still trying to think of the right thing to say to him to try and engage with him. And he sort of tapped me on the shoulder and he said, come on, he said, let's go and have a cup of tea. God save the Queen.
Yeah.
And then he led me inside. He was rescuing me, you know.
Yeah.
And I think when he said God save the Queen, it was a recognition that I was British because I was in Australia, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, who knows what was going on exactly. But what I do know was that I learned about the inevitability of compassion and that you suffer. You cannot avoid sharing in the suffering of others. And the more you try and just ignore it or somehow, you know, numb yourself to it, it doesn't work. And I think that's what a lot of people get into, you know, drugs and alcohol and other addictions for, because they feel for other people and they can't cope with it, and it's too painful to watch, you know, refugee children being drowned in the sea and or whatever else terrible things are happening. It's too much, so they say, oh, you know, let's numb myself. I've got to numb this. I've got to find a distraction.
Yeah.
And actually, the thing you have to do is just acknowledge that we are connected. We feel each other's pain. It can't be helped.
Yeah. The not feeling anything is better than feeling anything type thing. Blocking it out is easier than dealing with it. That is something that I think
maybe that's why
everybody.
psychology and psychiatry become academic in the sense of dry and a drift of real life.
Yeah.
Because it's protecting people from actually feeling the pain, which is enormous, that they're having to deal with day after day.
It's actually a very good point, Larry. That's pretty spot on. Now that you put it that way, it kind of makes a little bit more sense why it is so dry. You definitely see a lot of people go through it and they can't handle it. I've spoken to psychologists in various levels and various different fields or whatever, what have you. And some of them are broken. And I think it's that they got in it to help and to make change. And then that change becomes a little overwhelming because there is a lot of hurt and suffering out there. And then it is that immediate result afterwards of trying to mask it or cover it, whether it be alcohol or drugs or, but they break at the end of it. And I think what you're saying doesn't prepare future students for it because it denies them the ability to really look inside and go, you are going to feel things and you are going to have to acknowledge it and sit with it and really take it all in. Because if you don't, it'll break you. You don't hear that. You don't hear any of that. I've never heard it in any of my classes.
Well, you also have to say, and you can honor yourselves for that. You know, what you're doing is a noble undertaking. And humanity depends upon people like you doing things like that. Yeah. If it's to survive. I mean, you know, the TV shows about the frontline staff in hospitals and so on, looking after very sick COVID patients. And they are being broken by it. And they are being terrified. You know, I've got to go into work and I wake up in fear because I think I might get COVID and die. And yet I've got to go and I will go. And they do go, you know. And then they cry their eyes out on the way home, etc., and so on. And they cry at work and so on. And it's, you know, it's extreme. It's very extreme. And, you know, one can only, in a way, feel for them. And as we have done, honor them, clap for them, etc. And but there's and people in lockdown the same, having all kinds of worries and anxieties raised. And I wonder if all this isn't going to prompt a more wisdom approach, more of a wisdom approach or a spiritual approach to understanding life and living life. I would hope it might. I mean, the very fact that, you know, we're talking about all this stuff is a pretty good sign. And there are quite a few other people who've been taking an interest in, you know, interviewing me and stuff like that. And I think, and presumably reading and writing, reading stuff I've written because that's how they find out about me, you know. So I think it's possible to be hopeful. um, as you say, the universe has a way of self-correcting, you know, a kind of, and maybe this is it. Maybe it's correcting us from expelling greenhouse gases into the atmosphere by all the planes being grounded and so on and so on. I mean, but we have the lessons to be learned, and hopefully they will be.
Hopefully we listen. I think that's the thing. I think as much as it does overcorrect itself, it does give us warnings. It lets us know we think it and we feel it every day that something is incredibly wrong. Something is very, very wrong with the way we are headed and the way we are living. And it's not like we don't get warnings. I think even just using coronavirus as an example and to ignore the fact that it is one hell of a warning of like, we have to change. There has to be from the top down, very big change in the way we do things, and from the bottom up in the way we think and we see each other around us. There has to be change, I guess, at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening, and the universe will flatten it out and continue to do it. And once again, it's like, how many times does it need to happen for us to keep asking why? And then we need to take a good, long, hard look at ourselves and maybe assume it's us.
Amen.
Yeah, that's right. Adi, Larry, I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Thank you so much. You're a very wise man. My brain is going 100 miles an hour right now trying to absorb some of the things you said, and I definitely will be watching this back several times to try and take it all in.
See if you can get hold of a copy of my book, because it'll make it easier for you to work through what I've been talking about.
Yeah, I will. I'll grab it after this.
And if you have any difficulties getting hold of a copy in Australia, let me know. I'll send one out to you.
Oh, legend! That's awesome. That's great. Usually at the end of a show, we do a plug. So obviously, the Big Book of Wisdom.
Yeah.
What else?
The Little Book of Wisdom is coming out in August.
Cool little.
I wrote the Little Book of Wisdom to go with it. So for people who can, have a shorter attention span, it's.
I'll probably get that one. I'll go on those goldfish brains. No, I'll definitely get that. I'll jump online after this and see what I can get my hands on. Everybody who's listening or watching, I'll have all of Larry's links below when I do post this. So go check him out. He's a very wise man. Larry, anything you want to leave with?
Just namaste, shalom, God bless you. Thank you very much.
All right, Larry. Have a great day, my friend.
Thank you.
See you later, buddy. Whoo! That was Larry. Larry is probably one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to. I wasn't even talking to you. The stream's not finished, man. Why do I say it? He's just really well adjusted. He's it's not just like I've been through academia and I'm smarter than you. Like he took his time to talk to a dummy, and I appreciate that. I think it's a good thing. And he was very patient and he's very humble. So thank you, Larry. You're a legend. Like I said, I'll leave all these links below. Like and share the show if you wanna. If you don't, just listen to it. But definitely take something away from this. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.